Friends, as you heard, today we're talking about drifting. And I'm not going to lie to you. This is a very, self-serving episode. I love drifting. Daniel loves drifting. We like cars. We want to talk about cars. It's our podcast, so we're going to do it. But
legally, for the record, I don't personally love drifting.
Oh, yeah.
I love watching other people drift.
Yes, of course. We would never.
And playing video games with drifting.
Of course. We would never go to an empty parking lot and try to drift. Out. Never, ever. Not
at George Mason University.
Definitely not. Not in Lot K. Absolutely not. But before we get into today's episode, we're going to talk about today's sponsor, and that's Mouser Electronics. Folks, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know we love working with Mouser. And the reason we love working with them is because they relate really well with the things that we try to do. For example, telling an incredible audience that's interested in technology and, autonomous vehicles and maybe even drifting about the cool things that are happening in that industry, in that realm. So they write these incredible technical resources that are very easy to digest for someone like us that is interested and has some sort of a technical background, but also people that are just interested and don't have a technical background. They really know their audience. Let's just say that. So in the link that we're going to provide in the show notes for you today, they're talking about autonomous vehicles and the different levels there are out there. Specifically, they're referencing the Society of Automotive Engineers levels of autonomy. It goes from level 1 through level 5. Now, if you've been in the US and you've been seeing, most of these assisted driving technologies that still require you to put your hands on the steering wheel and whatnot, that's level 2. Level 3 has been the next barrier to, full autonomous vehicle driving. And there's some fuzzy area there that's between the legality of it and is the technology there. So they dig a little bit into that. And then they also talk about the companies taking a stab at this. Specifically, they reference how in 2021 in Japan, they started doing these trials with Honda. And now finally in 2024 in the United States, Mercedes is taking a jab with the S-Class sedan and the EQS. So, if this field is interesting to you, if you want to understand what Elon Musk actually means when he says next year we're going to get full autonomous vehicles, as he says every year, maybe this article can shine a light as to why it's been taking so long and what it's actually going to take for us to get there. Yeah, that's the gist of it. With that out of the way, let's actually jump into today's article. We're going to be going all the way to the West Coast of the United States to Stanford University. We got Professor Christian Gerdes, who's apparently just one of the biggest contributors to autonomous vehicles. Crazy, we've never covered him on the podcast, but now we got some homework to do. Out of Stanford University, working with the Toyota Research Institute. So Stanford has, I think, an entire, what is it? I'm blanking right now. Driving circles course? Track. There it is. Oh my God. They have a whole track dedicated for just autonomous vehicle development. Which is pretty cool, up there with University of Michigan's little city that they have for just developing this technology. And obviously you got Toyota, which is one of the biggest and best automotive manufacturers in the world. And they've been taking on the challenge of making safe autonomous vehicles, right? It's no easy feat, as we've been able to see over the past couple of years. And, we already kind of spoiled it, but they're tackling drifting. And as a listener, you might be wondering, why drifting? Dan, tell the good people, why drifting?
Well, because there's nothing better in the world than drifting.
Absolutely.
But also, the high level thesis here is if you can have AI that is reliable at the boundary cases in the most extreme driving conditions, with precise high risk maneuvers that usually have to be performed by professional drivers, the thesis here is that you push AI to its limits in a controlled environment with drifting, you can advance the potential for safer autonomous driving in other complex scenarios on the road that, maybe aren't as likely as drifting. But, again, you try and force AI and technology to be reliable at the boundary cases so that the not so boundary cases, you can take the lessons learned from that and make it more reliable.
Exactly. And the beauty of drifting, besides the aesthetics, of course, is that you have to have this incredible combination and precision when it comes to the amount of throttle and the amount of braking that's being used. It takes a lot of finesse, the driver has to have a lot of expertise to execute it the right way, or else you're either not going to drift or you're going to spin out, right?
Well, and that's why it's not safe for, folks at home to try this. Is it requires a lot of practice. you kind of have to like the phenomena behind it are so complex because the vehicle is slipping, but it also still retains a portion of its traction. The phenomenon is so complex that it's challenging for you to be able to like learn this, sitting around in a classroom and then go immediately apply it on the road the way that you might with like turning on your windshield wipers or coming to a stop and then making a right-hand turn. Drifting is something that you almost need to entirely replicate by feel. So it's a lot more challenging, right, to teach AI to do it, because you can't give it a bunch of strict rules and then say go do it. It also needs to kind of have a perception and a feel of, and I'm saying feel in apostrophes here for folks who are listening instead of watching. You kind of need to help AI learn with feel instead of the fundamental phenomenon that underline create the scenario of a car slipping, but still being able to control itself to some extent.
Absolutely. And that sense of feel and just general vibes of the drifting happening the right way becomes tenfold when you're not just drifting by yourself, but doing tandem drifting, which is where you have a leader and a chaser. So you have one car that's leading the drift and another car that's mimicking it and following it in its path, right? Now you have some car, like let's say, hypothetically, definitely not real, Daniel, you drifting in Lot K at George Mason University, and then me drifting behind you and trying to follow your lead, right?
This is actually hypothetical because there's no way we could actually pull this off.
This is true. This is very true. But you know what I mean? Like, not only do I have to make sure that I'm executing the drift in just the right way so that I'm not spinning out or anything, but I also now have to keep your randomness in mind and follow your lead as you change your pattern. And like at times we could be a foot or two away from each other. So the possibility of collision is actually quite high. So, this is going to require that right level of feel, which I feel like we've been teasing for a minute here. Let's jump into the sauce. Obviously, a difficult problem. We've tried our best to explain why it's difficult up to this point. Stanford University researchers, they're well aware of this. And they kind of threw this whole idea that we got to focus on a physics model completely out the door. They're like, forget that. No, we're going to go by vibes. So we're going to try to train a neural network that mimics and understands and grows over time as it drives so that it gets how to drift just the right way, right? And then, I'm sure they use reinforcement learning to give it prizes as it does things well over time. What the outcome has been is that you have two cars, a leader and a chaser, both being capable of drifting at up to 35 miles per hour speeds, at times 10 inches away from each other. So like, just at the level of finesse that you would expect from professional drifters, these two cars are able to execute together.
It's crazy. And I mean, it's not quite the same. This isn't tandem drifting, but it reminds me of the scene in Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. Do you know when I say the scene?
I know.
It's the one where there's two girls sitting in the car,
mm-hmm.
and then the two guys come at them in the Mazda and they're driving straight at them, and then they like drift a circle around them and it's super close, and the margin for error is so tight that if either one of those cars were to move unexpectedly, the entire thing could have turned into a crash. This feels like that, a mix of that Tokyo Drift, Fast and Furious-esque, mixed with like watching Formula One Grand Prix racing, where these vehicles are like inches apart from one another, traveling at super high speeds, snaking their way through a course, and the chase vehicle has to be able to react to changes in courses for the lead vehicle without causing a crash. And again, just as a I don't know if you can tell, as a slight motorhead, as a car enthusiast, it's something super beautiful and awesome to watch. We'll have this article linked in the show notes. I feel like this is like mandatory watching for anyone who's listening to this podcast.
So beautifully shot. So incredibly beautifully shot.
Go check out this article linked in the show notes. Watch. It's 3.5 minutes long, and about 1.5 minutes of that is just cars drifting around each other. So it's definitely worth a watch.
Definitely. And another thing that I realize now I didn't mention, what was beautiful to me is that in terms of the underlying technology of how the leader is path planning and how the communication is happening in general, they're just using GPS and Wi-Fi, which is not foreign. Like most of these modern new cars coming out, and I'm going to reference Tesla, they already have that technology on board. This is already in place. So a lot of the juicy bits happening here are with the neural network that's operating the vehicles. So you have the one up front doing the path planning, the one behind avoiding the collision and following its lead. And obviously what this has culminated to is a great drifting experience. But for the average listener, why does this matter? When I'm driving down Route 7, I don't care about drifting. And that's most people. Well, what you do care about is whenever we do reach level 3, level 4, level 5 autonomy, you want to make sure that when you take your hands off of those steering wheels, your car will not collide with another car, especially in these unperfect conditions. We know what Maryland drivers and Virginia drivers are like. To the folks outside of the United States or out of the East Coast, they're very bad drivers. That's the running joke. They're horrible drivers. So to, I guess, make up for those uncertain scenarios where someone is doing something bad, having a model that is so good at behaving in an unpredictable scenario that it can drift is going to come in quite handy. And that's the main motivation behind what they're doing here, not the beautiful, amazing drifts that you can watch a minute and a half of on the linked video.
Well, and I think, again, like the high level here is drifting is a perfect analogy for normal human being driving on ice, right? Lack of friction is the phenomenon that we're trying to understand here. Drifting is self-induced, purposeful lack of friction, but you or me driving on Route 7 on our way to one of each other's house, if there's an icy patch in the road, the same fundamental principles for drifting apply again here. And again, that's where we talked about creating deliberate boundary cases to test and to train AI in a way that makes it more bulletproof, more reliable for the common person, because those boundary cases are boundaries for a reason. They don't always occur, but when they do, you want a way of having generated these cases, in the past to train the AI algorithms to be really, really robust. And I think one of the cool things to talk about here is like just how fast and how heavily instrumented these vehicles are to help develop this AI model, and how many calculations they do. They apparently are able to replan their route up to 50 times per second. They're instrumented with a bunch of sensors that essentially allow the vehicle to feel gravity and to feel friction, almost as a metaphor for the way that a driver would feel it, if they were inside the car driving. Right. So I like the idea here that this entire powertrain, transmission, suspension are fitted with an array of sensors and computers that control the steering, control the throttle, control the brakes, obviously, right? It's self-driven, but then also have control mechanisms that help it gain feedback on how is the vehicle moving, what does the inertia feel like inside the vehicle, because that's how a human driving the vehicle would feel and use their senses to try and control it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one thing that wasn't mentioned in the article and I wasn't able to find is how much of this model that they've been fine-tuning and developing is constrained to the vehicle that it was trained on. Basically, like how much of it is portable and can be applied to a different car. I remember, I think a couple weeks ago, we did an episode on a robotic platform where it had like general knowledge of how to do a task or a set of tasks. And then the last 20% of the learning would happen, on the job where it would get it right. So I wonder if it's something like that, where just the general idea of what it means to drift the right way is like same across the board. And then the feel of the car that has to be factored into those measurements is then the last 10% that might have to be fine-tuned.
Well, I'm with you, and I would gladly volunteer to test this in the vehicles that they developed it on. I feel like it'd be fun if you and I were doing tandem drifting together in the pair of Supras. They took Toyota Supras, and that's the ones that they did the development on.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. It would be interesting to understand, like, not only specific to the vehicle model of the Supra, but also like all the instrumentation available on the Supra. Is this something that you can't trust a normal self-driving car on the road because it doesn't have enough sensors? Or are the sensors that they fitted this Supra actually pretty equivalent to something like what a Tesla or a Waymo taxi might have. Like, I would be interested in understanding, are the capabilities of this car vastly different than your run-of-the-mill autonomous vehicle?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's really all I had on this.
I do have something else to mention.
Sure.
Just because I have to give some kudos to Top Gear. So I was doing some research for this episode. Top Gear the blog, not Top Gear the show, which is, by the way, one of the greatest shows of all time.
Amen to that.
The Top Gear blog. I was doing some research on this, read one of their articles related to this development. The headline, Toyota completed the world's first autonomous twin drift in a pair of Supras, but the subheader here is like the most important part, and I think it completely captures our feelings and emotions on this, right? So this technology yields positive impacts on the development of future terrain technology. Cool. But mostly, look, a self-driving twin drift. Like, that's where our heads are at. Like, this is super cool. It does have potential implications for like driving on ice, driving on mud, driving in low mu or like low friction conditions. But also, look, it's really cool. These two cars are independently, autonomously controlled, and they look like a pair of figure skaters dancing around each other. But instead of it being on ice, they're on normal asphalt. I don't know. It's awesome.
It brings me back to the first time I watched Tokyo Drift as a kid. It's just, there's something magical about it. I can't explain it. It's incredible.
Yeah, it evokes some level of nostalgia. I'm with you, man. And I will, like, I'm just going to take a little bit of a jab here. I feel like we get a lot of, like, I see hype videos on Twitter about like, wow, like, look at my Tesla autopilot. Like, it's switching lanes for me on the highway, which is like a really routine thing that everyone does every single day. And I understand that is valuable and that is useful. But I feel like companies like Tesla and Waymo are focusing on like basic road safety. This project is focusing on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, pushing the limits, making sure that if self-driving cars are safe in a twin drifting scenario, which is probably the most dangerous driving you can possibly do, trying to take the learnings from that and apply it to, like, your run-of-the-mill merging on a highway.
Shots were taken. You just... My God.
That's not to say,
you said
a Tesla or a Waymo can't make their car drift. I appreciate Toyota's Research Institute kind of taking the fun way on this, and their Japanese OEM, Tokyo Drift,
Supras,
Supras. There's a little bit of favoritism here if you guys can't tell.
Yeah, it's coming full circle. All right, let's do a quick wrap up, folks. If you ever watch Need for Speed Tokyo Drift and thought, I hope one day I could do that, and likely you never did and you never will, well, you're in luck, because researchers at Stanford University have come up with a neural network, an AI algorithm that can drift. And not only can it drift, it can tandem drift. That means you and your best buddy can drift together in parking lots where you probably should not be drifting. Now, the reason this is important is because they've been working with the Toyota Research Institute to figure out how we can make AI models, remember when we're getting to level 3, level 4, level 5 autonomous driving, that we can really trust in uncertain scenarios when driving in the road. Imagine if it's really icy. That's kind of like how you'd be managing your car if it was drifting. It's really cool what they've done here. They've kind of ditched the physics model and went completely on the feel of the road and gravity that a driver would usually feel. And the result is astounding. They've been able to accomplish drifting at 35 miles an hour, two cars next to each other, sometimes 10 inches away from each other without crashing, drifting like absolute pros. That's why I think this is the biggest news in the automotive industry in the past God knows how long.
Nailed it.
I try. I do what I can, for the friends, for the drifting loving friends.
I'm hoping one day, look, Stanford friends, if you're listening, Toyota Research Institute friends, if you're listening, let us know. Reach out. We would absolutely love to hop on a plane.
Just let us know.
Well, we would love to hop on a plane, film some freaking sweet content with you guys, post it all over our social media, because I'm sure our community would be just as excited about this as we are. At least a portion of them.
In fact, let us know. Comment, let them know, tag them, let them know that we want to do this just for you, We want to make content for you. It's not for us.
Yeah, if you want to see us ride in autonomously drifted cars,
give us a shout.
Want to see us die?
Give us a shout. All right, folks. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, we'll catch you in the next one.
Peace.